Before we get into this week's podcast, I'd like to encourage you to go visit Confined Space Coffee. This is safety-grade, premium coffee crafted with the same precision and care that goes into confined space rescue planning and operation. Plan your work and work your plan with Confined Space Coffee. Men at the Movies listeners can get 10% off their first order by putting in MATM in the coupon code. Elevate your work. Coming up on the Men at the Movies podcast, I have a conversation with Greg Allan Martin. He shares his story of growing up in Little Rock, heading off to law school, being a prosecutor in LA for 30 years, and now stepping into a major role on the TV show Shadrach. Following your dreams doesn't always lead to glory and fame, but doing the things that align with your core values. In Greg, I see a man who does justice, loves mercy, and walks humbly with God. Join us as we dive into his story.
The movies and stories we love are gateways to see ourselves and God in new ways.
Every great story borrows its power from a larger story, the story that's written on our hearts and woven into the fabric of our very being. Hello and welcome to the Men at the Movies podcast. My name is Paul McDonald, and before I intro my guest, who's I'm very excited about, Greg Allan Martin, I have to tell the story of how we got connected. His publicist Steve reached out to me by email and said, "Hey, I heard the Stand By Me episode, and I think Greg would be great to come on and talk to you about faith and his story and stuff." So we're not talking about a movie today, but we're going to talk about the stories that move him and the stories that his story, the story of his life, and so that's the stuff I get excited about, is getting into a guy's story. So, Greg, thank you for joining us and welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Oh, thank you, Paul. It's a pleasure to be here. I really appreciate you having me on, and I'm doing great. Thank you.
Well, it's like I said, it's something I'm really excited about, and I think so before we get into the stories that you love, I want to hear about your story first, because you've been involved in some pretty cool roles, like you've interacted with some pretty cool guys and women there up on the different screens, small and large. And so, how did that happen? How did you get into acting? And we'll kind of go back from there, I think.
Okay. Well, I shouldn't say that my story is unique, because everybody has their own personal story and personal journey. But it certainly wasn't a common way to get into the business, because I don't know how far back you want to go, but I grew up in Little Rock, Arkansas. Fairly, normal middle class. Oh, wait, that sounds, that's not a great thing to say these days. But, I had two brothers, and we were all very much involved in sports. I mean, that was kind of what our life focused around. Football, basketball, baseball. We were big swimmers back when swimming was just getting started back in Arkansas and in the South. But the good thing is my parents, my dad especially, always made sure that we understood that term student athlete. There was a reason why student came first. So he was always very adamant that, your grades, your studies, everything comes first, or you don't get to play. And that was a great thing. I'll always be grateful for that, because what ended up happening, I ended up eventually getting a football scholarship to Vanderbilt. And I specifically chose Vanderbilt because they played Division I football, and they're having a great year this year. They beat Alabama.
That's right. Beating Alabama is a big thing for Vandy.
Oh, my gosh. It was amazing. Yeah. But it was Division I football, but it was the best combination of big time football and great academics. So I'll never regret that choice. I had a great time doing it, and went from there into law school. And then that led to an almost 30-year career as a Los Angeles County deputy district attorney. So the truth is, for most of my life, I have not been primarily an actor. I've been a prosecutor. But I, all along the way, had this interest in theater. I did some church plays when I was growing up, did a couple of things locally in junior high, but football and studying was so consuming in college. I just didn't have time to pursue it. But when I got into law school, ironically, they had this amateur theater company in law school. So all of the plays were written by and produced by and acted by law school students. Oh, and wow. I just had a blast doing this. But still, it was just a hobby. And then I, as I said, started working as a deputy district attorney in Los Angeles County. And for a while, I didn't have time to do any theater there. But eventually, once I got settled in, found a theater company. It was actually a Christian theater company in Los Angeles at Hollywood Presbyterian Church, the legendary, historic Hollywood Presbyterian Church. And while I was a district attorney, I managed to do probably 25 plus plays with them over the years.
Wow.
So I would do trials during the day and do theater at night. And I would always tell people the reason I had to do that was because an audience of only 12 people at a time during the day was just not enough for my ego. So it was always a hobby, and I'm sorry for going on so long, but just to finish the timeline there, I retired from the DA's office a couple of years ago, and that has allowed me to more fully dedicate myself to acting. So I'm really enjoying the opportunities that God's providing now.
That's awesome. What took you from Vanderbilt in Arkansas up to L.A.?
Well, I had gone to law school up in Boston and stayed around, worked in Boston for a little while at a management consulting firm. And then at some point, I just thought, I want to go out to California. I was, quite frankly, I was really tired of the cold weather in Boston. Love the city of Boston, but I was so tired of it. And I'd always wanted to live in California. I thought seriously about going to law school out there, but I decided not to. So I just moved out to California with the idea of getting into criminal law out there. And I got to admit, back in the back of my mind was, well, maybe I'll have more of an opportunity to do a little more acting as a sideline while I'm out there. And that proved to be true.
So how did you sort of get your foot in the door? You know, you're out there working as an attorney and as a prosecutor at this point, right?
Right.
And
exactly.
I'm guessing, how long ago was this?
This was back in the mid-'80s.
Mid-'80s. Okay. So you're there doing the prosecutor thing. And how did you get into the biz?
Yeah, that's a good. Well, again, certainly not the usual way, but one of the things you have to do. Again, I was doing a lot of theater, but I thought, it'd be fun to do a little bit of film and TV. And so I did what everybody does. You go and you find an agent. And of course, at that time, with no real background in it, other than a lot of theater, which I did a lot of great theater. I was very grateful for my time in the theater company there. But I found an agent, fairly low-level agent, and started getting a few auditions every once in a while. But the problem was, of course, I had a full-time job, so I couldn't go out to a lot of auditions because back then, it's changed now. Now you do everything by video and self-tape. But back then, you had to go to casting offices and go back for callbacks. So I just couldn't do that. So my ability to pursue it was very, very limited. But God blessed me with a few opportunities to work on some shows here and there. I mean, going all the way back to, a day as a policeman on Murder, She Wrote, and, a number of old shows there that I got to do. And finally, I started to get a little bit more traction, like I said, even though I wasn't pursuing it full time. But then eventually I was able to do shows that had some real visibility to them, like OZARK. I happened to get a great little part in the second episode of the first season of OZARK. It had a really nice scene with Jason Bateman. And that, of course, just whetted my appetite to want to do it more. So there was always this tension between I've got a full-time job, which I love. I love being a prosecutor. And at the same time, feeling this pull to want to do some more filming. But I just had to go, I made this decision, and I'm so glad I did. I thought when I first moved out to California, you can't help but think, geez, maybe I could make it. Maybe I could just do this. But I made what I think was a very wise decision at the time, going, for the sake of family and steady income and that sort of thing, I don't want to pursue acting full time, because the percentage of people who actually make a living at it, I think the percentage is like less than maybe even 5 or 10% that even make more than $10,000 a year as an actor. So I had a great career and was able to finally move into doing a little bit more work here and there. And then, like I said, once I retired, the chance to do more has come along.
So you had mentioned that you loved being a prosecutor. So what was it, I guess even going back to what drew you to law school, and then what was it that you love about being a prosecutor?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, when I mentioned earlier that I grew up with 2 brothers, an older brother and a younger brother. So my older brother's 2 years older, and I really idolized him. He's just a great guy, really good athlete, very smart. He played football at Vanderbilt 2 years before I did. And so we were on the team together, and then he went off to, he actually went 1 year to Harvard Business School and then finished up at Stanford Business School, which is a whole other story. But I had just followed in his footsteps all my life. And unlike a lot of people in those situations that you read about, I didn't really chafe under that comparison. I was always kind of Doug's little brother, but I kind of loved it because I really did idolize the guy. I still do in a lot of ways. But part of my thinking, it was twofold in terms of going to law school. Part of it, and it's really the secondary reason, I thought, I just can't keep doing everything that he does. I can't go to business school. So I got to find something different to do. But the other thing was that law, and especially the idea of criminal law, just really spoke more to my heart about, I had this idea. I didn't know anyone who was a prosecutor. I didn't know anyone involved in criminal law when I decided to go to law school. And quite frankly, when I made the decision to go to law school, I wasn't sure I wanted to be in criminal law. But the whole idea of law just appealed more to that part of my nature that just sort of responds to the idea of right and wrong and of justice, and in trying to pursue something that had, and I don't mean to demean any other pursuit or any other profession, but to me, it just seemed to speak more to values than it did to just making money, just doing a job that was all about the pursuit of money, or how you make money, or how you help other people make money. I just thought law might appeal more to my, inner value system.
And, it's really interesting because so many, I was just talking with a friend of mine about, like as we get older, we talk about kids these days and how they all want a job that means something to them, that, they find their calling and their purpose, and it's all wrapped up in this job that provides financially for their family. And it's interesting to see you sort of did experience some of that being a prosecutor, where most people were like, oh, they might say, you didn't pursue your dream of being an actor, and you could have had it big. But you're like, no, actually that was like, they both can be dreams. Right. Yeah. And you were even pursued or provided the opportunity to pursue that, even as you were following in pursuing your career as a prosecutor, and still getting sort of your bucket filled with some acting gigs, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But, growing up, part of my dream was to, be a husband, be a father, and raise kids and provide for them and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, the possibility of doing that as an actor and really hitting it big is there, but it is a slight possibility. And I know so many people that have spent their life pursuing that dream, but they're doing it while they're working as bartenders and waiters and caterers and this sort of thing. And, there's a lot of sadness and disappointment that comes along with that. And it's a shame. That's the nature of the so many artistic pursuits. I saw something the other day, an article that came out with the, top 10 earning potential jobs when you graduate in the bottom 10. And the top 10 were naturally all, tech and engineering related, but the bottom 10, they were talking about college majors. They were mostly theater related or arts related or music related. And it's a shame because so many people are so talented and they have those dreams. But, at some point you just got to go, Lord, I'm going to turn this over to you. If you want to bless that side of me that's there, I'm going to leave that up to you as to how and when you do that.
That's a really powerful and mature place to get to. Yeah. Is to, again, I was down in Florida visiting a friend of mine this week, and we had a lot of really deep conversations. We didn't do much. We just sat around and talked for like 3 days.
That's a great show.
Like you said, the story of Mary and Martha, where Mary's sitting at Jesus' feet, and Martha comes out and she's like, "What? Jesus, make Mary come help me in the kitchen." And he's like, "No, she's doing what she should be doing. Yeah. She's doing what she needs to do." And that attitude for us as Westerners, as Americans, that is kind of opposite of what we think. We think, strive, pursue, bust your butt, race out of the courtroom to go hit, but to like do a rehearsal or to try out for a part, but to have that maturity to sit and say, yeah, this is something I'd love to do, but God, you're going to do it. You're going to provide the opportunities, even without me chasing and striving and doing all the things that everybody tells you to do, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And, we all have these plans, especially as you were talking about it, when you're young, about these dreams that you have, the plans that you have. But you know the old adage, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. But as I got older and got to be more involved in doing acting, I mean, there are a couple of things here. One is that I was able to do a lot of theater. And theater just speaks to my heart more than anything. I think most actors will say that, the ones who've had a chance to do theater. There's just nothing like the experience of being on stage and doing it live. And as an aside here, I can relate it to being an athlete, because there's a similarity there. When the whistle blows or the curtain goes up, you're on. You got to perform. So the adrenaline rush is there. The interaction with the audience or the spectators is there. It's the same kind of thing. So doing theater is the closest thing I can relate to doing competitive sports. But the other aspect of it is, and of course, a lot of this maturity comes as you get older and you look back and you can see how God has orchestrated the journey along the way. Because there were certainly times when, I'm not making a ton of money working for the government, working in the DA's office. I'm not making near the money that I not only would have made if I'd made it big as an actor, but not even the money I would have made if I'd gone to a big law firm. But I made choices that I thought would speak to my heart. And I love Tim Keller. God bless him. And he died way too young. But I remember one of the quotes that he said was, God always gives you what you would have asked for if you knew everything that he knows. And I thought that's just so profound. We just don't know. He has a plan, and it's so often different than the plans that we have. But I just look back and go, I have just been so blessed with the journey that he has taken me on.
Yeah, so I feel like this would be a good time to talk about that of when did sort of God enter your life? Because reading the article in the Voyage LA that Steve sent over, seems like there's always been that presence.
Yeah, I grew up in again, cliche, a Christian home. But remember, this is time back in the 50s and 60s. It was just a different era in this respect. So my mom and dad, church every Sunday. So I went to church every Sunday in my life. I was involved in, Sunday school and Young Life, and eventually when I got to college, the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. But it was just part of who we were. But at the same time, there were not, Bible studies in the home or life groups, and it really wasn't even discussed a lot in the house. We said grace before meals, and then we just go to church. So yeah. I didn't get a lot of instruction in the home. My dad or mom didn't sit down with me and talk to me about these things. I mean, when I had questions, they would answer them, but it was just sort of like, this is who we were. We were just, quote unquote, a good Christian family. Mm-hmm. So I grew up, I think, with a lot of really naive ideas about faith. One being, of course, because, most things came kind of easy to me then, sports and school. So I had this really naive, and you could say even completely backward notion that, I was a good kid, and things went well for me because I was a good kid and because I was a good Christian. It's like, if I do things, if I believe in God, then things are going to work out, because that's just kind of the way it seemed. But interestingly, it's very strange to say this nowadays, especially what's going on in elite universities, because they are just such a hotbed of liberalism and either atheist think or agnostics. It's just, you don't hear a lot about Christian faith on campus, but they're there. The Christian faith is there on so many campuses. And when I got to law school, I was involved we had a little Christian group that was there. But more so than that, I got to be friends with, probably 12, 15 really close people in my initial law school class. And these were the smartest people I have ever been around. I was intimidated. I really think I was the token Arkansan that they let into law school that year. But what was interesting is part of me was, it's not like I wore my faith on my sleeve, but, people eventually, they find out that you're a Christian or that you believe in God. And I was a little bit trepidatious that I would be, kind of ostracized for that, or that they would denigrate or mock my faith. But to the contrary, I had a number of really close friends who would just go, hey, why do you believe that stuff? I mean, isn't that stuff just all kind of myth and nonsense? I mean, tell me about that. Why do you think the basic underlying question there was, how can a smart person believe what you believe? And what that did was it forced me to think, wow, do I believe this just because I grew up in that Christian home? Is this a cultural belief for me? Is it just something that I was taught and I went to church and Sunday school, so that's what I believe? Or is it really true? So that started, and it's great that this happened while I was in law school, because I was starting to be trained in how to think analytically and critically, do research. So I started reading, Josh McDowell, Everything That Demands a Verdict. I started reading other apologetic works and just really started studying. And the result of all that was not that I came to doubt my faith. It was that I came to the absolute conviction that, wow, I don't believe it's just because I grew up with it. I believe it because it is true. It not only fits my worldview and my value system, but it's true. I believe now in the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus Christ and the entirety of the historicity of the Bible, all of it. And it's so, ironically, as I said, going to law school strengthened my faith.
That's really cool.
And it's continued to grow ever since then.
Yeah, and I think many of us, if you grew up in a Christian home, as sort of stereotype that we think of, there does come a moment where we have to say, wait, do I believe this because this is what my parents taught me? Or I went to church all my life? Or do I believe it because I actually believe it and I think it's true? And everybody, I think, wrestles through that question differently. But it's even interesting to me, like, as you going into law school, you picked the book that said, what was the title of it? Everything Has a Verdict?
Evidence That Demands a Verdict.
Evidence That Demands a Verdict. And again, it's that, as we talk about on this podcast a lot, the scenes and the stuff, the stories that move our hearts reveal something about how God's created us.
Right.
And this theme in your life of that justice and law and right and wrong and all that, and even in your pursuit to find an anchor and a foundation, still went kind of through that same channel, it looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really did inform what I did as a prosecutor in so many ways. I had on my desk a little plaque with my favorite Bible verse, which is, I know you're familiar with, Micah 6:8. For what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God? And that threefold aspect in that verse was really important to me and something I tried to remember every day. In fact, backing up a little bit, I remember when I went into the DA's office the very first day. At that time, the DA in Los Angeles County was Gil Garcetti. And I came in with a class of maybe a dozen other young prosecutors. And I'll never forget what he said to us that day. He goes, from this moment on, you have both the privilege and the responsibility of doing what is right. And that really meant a lot to me because that's what I wanted to do as a prosecutor. I wanted to do what was right. Now, that's not to say that every prosecutor, every, law enforcement person does what's right. We all know that in every profession there are bad apples. But for me, I wanted to keep that in mind. So the Micah 6:8, do justice. That was my job every day to make sure that justice was done. But the second part of that, love mercy. There is a way to do justice, but at the same time, understand the need for mercy when it is called for. I was absolutely committed that I would never prosecute a case or take it to trial if I didn't fully believe in the guilt of the person I was prosecuting. And if I found out that even once a prosecution had begun, or even once a trial had begun, if there was some evidence that I didn't know about, that usually doesn't happen because you're supposed to have all of the evidence disclosed to you. But if there was something about the case or something about the witness or something about any of the facts involved, that I had to take a step back and go, wait a minute. I'm no longer sure about my ability to prosecute this truth. I'm no longer sure if what we are claiming as a DA's office is true, that I'm not going to take it to trial. And the great thing about at least my experience in the DA's office was the leadership we had in the DA's office at the time. I could easily go to my superiors and say, I don't think this case is here. I don't think we can prosecute this. And I was never questioned on that. I always had carte blanche to do what I felt like was right. And the third part of that was to walk humbly with your God. In any profession where you have a degree of power, which is certainly true in the DA's office. And unfortunately, I don't think that what I'm about to say is true in a lot of law enforcement agencies these days. You have to keep in mind that you're not God.
Mm.
that you've been given a degree of power, prosecutorial power in my case, but you have to recognize that you have to do that with humility, that you're not God. You don't get to impose your will. I have to follow the law and do what is right and make sure what I'm doing is just. So those three things, the justice, the mercy, and the humility, were very important to me throughout my entire career.
Wow, that's really awesome. And even the story you said of, when you're pursuing justice, but then you're also loving mercy, it's almost, the scales of justice come to mind, and both of those have to be balanced and weighed in tension. But then you said when something would come that would make you question the guilt of the other person. I think that's the living out, the walking humbly of saying, wait, what I thought, am I wrong with this? Is this, I believed this, new evidence came to light, and to have the humility to go to God and go to the evidence and sort of all the things, and to say, oof, am I right in this?
Right.
Because humility is a challenging thing to strive for, to chase. Exactly. During the sort of the depths of COVID, when everybody was sort of had their opinions and had their mindsets and would come up. We were actually, I was in this group, 1-year discipleship program, and this was the month of humility. So we read a whole book on humility, stories and all this, and we're at the table and it's like, well, why do you believe this? Where are you getting your information? What is this? And it came down to, well, here's why I believe what I believe. I might be wrong.
Yeah.
But it's not really based in what I think. It's what's based in these people that I trust think.
Right.
Which I think is an expression of, well, I believe this and I trust God. So I'm going to trust him to tell me if I need to turn here or turn there, or if I'm right or wrong, and sort of release the results to him.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's why the Bible talks so much about pride and so much about humility. It reminds me of, I don't know if you're familiar with Frank Turek. I listen to his podcast a lot. He's got a podcast called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. And he's very, very good. He's incredibly smart. He speaks at college campuses and events all over the country. But he jokes about that with humility. He goes, yeah, I'm thinking about writing a book called How to Be Humble in 10 Easy Steps and How I got there in 6.
So I want to switch gears a little because sure. We've talked a lot about your career as a prosecutor and a lawyer, but you mentioned, and even a little bit, how that career sort of resonated with your heart. It was the themes that God had given you of even justice and mercy, and all summed up there in Micah 6:8. Yeah. And how you did have this dream, and how acting, being on stage, puts your heart, it brings your heart to life. And I think having both of those involved in your life, probably one helped the other as they sort of, because they weren't all one or the other. It was sort of a pendulum swinging back and forth.
Right.
But you had mentioned something that is a far greater calling, and the purpose of our existence is being a husband and a father. You were a brother. So I was just wondering if you'd share some of that story of how you became a husband and a father.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I mean, I don't need the details of how you became a father. That's a different.
It was just something that always meant a lot to me. And got married and had 2 boys that are now 20, 29, and 21. Started late, and one of them is living in Santa Barbara and working, and just told me last night he's about to get engaged, which is great.
Oh, congratulations.
And then I got a younger boy who is a senior at Texas Christian in Fort Worth at TCU. So I'm blessed. They're good boys, and they're doing fine. And it's I don't get to see them as much as I'd like to because we're all kind of spread out right now. But certainly looking forward to the day that it's one of the reasons I'm an older father, but it's one of the reasons I'm trying to take care of myself so I can live long enough to see grandchildren.
Oh, yeah. I've got 2 grandchildren, and definitely that is a younger person's game.
Yeah, it is.
7 and 5 now. So
yeah, that's great.
In those early years, physical therapy is now part of our budget.
I'm going this afternoon, now that you think about it. Now that you speak of it, yeah, I know it well. I went to going back to football. I'm in Nashville right now, and a couple of weeks ago there was a reunion for the 1974 Peach Bowl team at Vanderbilt that I was part of. So we went there, and it was a weekend mostly just looking at name tags, trying to figure out who all these old people were. But so they brought us out it wasn't even on the field. It was in the end zone at halftime and introduced us. And I remember thinking, I've spent so many years watching sporting events, football games, especially where they'll bring out an old team and you just sit there as an audience member going, wow, those guys are old.
How did they ever play football?
Yeah. They must have worn leather helmets back then. So I texted my oldest son, or both my sons, a picture of us on the field. And, oh, God bless sarcastic kids. My older son, all he does is text back and goes, well, I'm impressed you weren't one of the ones in a wheelchair. Thanks, son.
It all depends on where the bar is, right?
Yeah.
If that's the bar, hey, we're doing pretty good. If we want to walk around pain-free, well, that ship may have sailed.
Yeah, exactly. I know we're getting sidetracked here, but I just love this line so much. A few years ago, I was back in Little Rock, and I get together with some high school friends when I go back there, and I was out bike riding with this old buddy of mine one day, and somehow, as happens like right now, these conversations come up, and he went, and he's just a good old Southern boy. He goes, yeah, you're getting old when sleeping makes you sore. That nailed it right there.
Yeah, and I hate that I can relate to that.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so let's go back to sort of so when did you retire from being a prosecutor?
It was about 2.5 years ago. Now, okay. Without segueing too much into politics, but I love my career as a DA, like I said, but it was time to retire, and there were a lot of factors that were involved in that. At that time, George Gascon had just become the DA like a year prior to that. And he wasn't the reason I retired, but it was a good time to retire because our office had, from my standpoint, and a lot of guys I know, had become a really dispiriting place to work. I think he just undermined what we were doing as prosecutors in so many ways, and it was really not as fun. I didn't feel like we were doing what was right as much. And I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but I am just very, very grateful that California is waking up in a lot of ways regarding crime. And one of those is that they elected a new DA. So I think there is going to be a new regime, but I think there's going to be it's going to be a lot more significant time for the DA's office there. And the electorate also reversed Prop 47, which had reduced anything under $950 in theft to a misdemeanor. And I remember when all this happened, I just thought, what are you people doing? Don't you understand? And not just in LA, but in so many places across the country. Don't you understand what this is going to do to crime? It's just going to go through the roof, not to mention the whole defund of the police. But yeah, like I said, I know we could go down that rabbit hole, and I don't want to do that. But to answer your question, I did retire at that time. It was a good time to retire. And I loved my career there. But like I said, almost 30 years there. And it's been great. It's allowed us to do, more traveling, and it's allowed me to do a lot more in terms of auditioning and acting. And here again is how you see God working. And I'm just so grateful for this. When I was a DA, obviously I had a full-time job. I mentioned earlier, you can't just run around and do auditions all the time. And even when I had a chance to audition and have the chance to do some parts, I was not able to, let's say I got a part that called me to go somewhere and shoot a movie for a month or be on a set for 6 weeks. I couldn't do that while I was a DA unless I quit my job. I mean, a lot of times I was in the middle of a trial. There were some small jobs that I turned down because I can't, I'm in trial right now. So what I did was I would do jobs that would take a day or a two. There were a couple of times when I was able to take a vacation for a week and go off to Atlanta and shoot a movie. So I was really grateful for what I had. But when I retired, it was like, okay, God, I'm out here now. I want to do projects that mean something to me, but somehow glorify you. Not every Hollywood project does that, obviously. And I'll say right now that there are great projects out there. They require bad guys in them. So I was actually watching, it's kind of guilty pleasure for me, one of those Taylor Sheridan shows called Tulsa King. With starring Sylvester Stallone, and it's pretty funny. But I only mention that because I don't know if you know who Neil McDonough is. If you saw him, you'd recognize him. He has been in so much stuff. He is a fantastic actor, but he is a very, very strong, committed Christian and family man. And in Tulsa King, he is playing a mean, bad dude. So there's always, but anyway, I tend to do this. I'm wandering, but I said to the Lord, I want to do projects that honor you, but mainly I just want to work as an actor now. I've got the time, I've got the ability, and whatever kind of project it's on, if I can somehow glorify you with just by being a part of it or being a light on the set, whatever. And 3 months after I retired, I got an audition for this show called Shadrach. And it's a wonderful family show, but we can talk more about that. But to the point I'm making right now, it required me, because it was for a series regular, and I got the part, but I had to go to Atlanta. We shot it in Covington, Georgia, which is just outside of Atlanta, for 6 weeks. If I had gotten that while I was a DA, I couldn't have done it. I would have had to turn it down or quit. But it came along 3 months after it was just a confirmation. I just went, thanks, God. That's pretty cool. And so I was able to go out and be part of this wonderful series for 6 weeks. And I'd love to talk to you about that series.
Yeah, man. You're reading my mind, because I was like, oh, let's tee up Shadrach.
Yeah.
So what appeals to you? What appealed to you about that project? Well,
whenever you get a script, to me, everything about the world of film and TV goes back to the writing.
Yeah.
Looking at both types of projects. Again, there are projects that appeal to my heart, to my value system, and there may be projects that don't necessarily, and yet if I don't feel like it's, presenting a worldview that's antithetical to my own values, if it's a good part and there's not something, again, that I think is going to offend God by doing that, I have no problem doing that. Going back to the example of Neil McDonough in Tulsa King, and even in the Bible, there are a lot of bad guys in the Bible. Oh my gosh, my men's group, we're going through Genesis right now. We've just gotten to the stories about, it's not that the first time I've read them, but just going into them in depth about Lot and what happens in Sodom and Gomorrah, and Lot saying, the men come to, basically have sex with the angels that he's harboring in his house. And he goes, no, take my daughters. And you just go, oh my gosh. So
what is that mindset? What is that?
Yeah.
I don't understand it.
And then shortly after that, his daughter's sleeping with him. It's like, wow, there's a lot of really shocking stories in the Bible. So again, I don't have a problem with doing stories like that. But the writing has to be top notch for me to be interested in it. And you can tell that when you just get the sides. And by sides, I mean, for an audition, you just get a scene or two, and you can tell within that writing, you go, okay, this is good writing. This is something that I can see doing. And the truth is, when you get bad writing, it's hard to do in an audition. It just doesn't sound real. So when I got Shadrach, when I read it, I just went, wow, this is just such a wonderful, uplifting, affirming story about a family, a multi-generational family. Now, this is not giving anything away because you find this out in the first 5 minutes of the show. But what happens is parents who have two kids, a 12-year-old girl and a 10-year-old boy, they're living in the big city. I think it's supposed to be Atlanta. And he's got a great job, and they live in a big penthouse apartment and this sort of thing. And he loses his job. Basically, his brother-in-law has cheated him, and he loses his company. And so they are forced to move from the big city to the country and live on the grandparents' farm until they can basically, rebuild their lives.
Yeah.
And I play Pawpaw. As an aside, it took me a while when I got the audition to get over the fact that I was now old enough to audition for a character named Pawpaw. But I'm the farmer, the rancher. My wife and I live near. So it's a show it really harks back to the days of Little House on the Prairie or the Waltons, that sort of thing. And it's a cliche to say it's a family show. It's good for the whole family, but it really is, because it's all about what happens when you are suddenly forced to change everything. And that happens in so many ways, big and small. That change happens in life. It's inevitable. Sometimes that change is really hard. So you can imagine the dad's lost his job. The mom, they have to move back to her hometown, which she had escaped. And so it's sort of humiliating for her to have to go back there, and she's not living the high life anymore. But for the kids, especially, because you can imagine a 12-year-old girl, she's pretty, she's popular, she's enjoying all of her junior high school friends, and all of a sudden it's like, sorry, we're going to the country and live with your grandparents. Yeah. And in one of the first scenes, she gets out of the car, it's even in the trailer, she holds up her phone and goes, there's no cell service. And so she and her younger brother, they don't want to go, and they're very upset. And you can imagine this. And so the show then becomes about how do these three generations live together and not just survive it, but how do they thrive in the midst of this? And how do they learn from each other? As parents, I'm thinking of the grandparents, usually when you're young, when your kids move away and get married, a lot of times they don't live in the same city. And so you don't see them very often. You don't get to spend time with the grandkids very often. And, there's very little interaction, I don't think, other than on, unless you do live very close, between kids and grandparents, especially when they're school age like that, for these kids to really learn that, wow, my grandparents have a lot of wisdom. Now, another thing that happens in the show is that there's a horse that comes into the picture. And Anna, the young girl, she develops this bond with this horse. And so now she's learning from Paw, the grandfather, about how to take care of a horse, how to do the chores on a farm. And what happens over the course of this show is that and there's a lot of heart in it. There's a lot of humor in it. There's a little bit of drama. There's the bad, mean neighbor who gets involved. And so there's a lot that takes place, but it's seeing three generations really enjoying just being together. And I'm hesitant to say it's a faith-based show. It's just more of a family series, because these days when you say faith-based, and this could be another discussion, some people go, oh, that's going to be cheesy. Right. That's going to be, corny. And yeah, there's some, corny aspects to a show like this, but it is not preachy. They don't throw it in your face. There's no conversion stories, and it's not like the old-time faith-based shows. It's just, this family's kind of like mine growing up. They say grace before meals, and, they go to church, and on occasion they'll say, hey, let's just pray about that. But they don't make a big deal about it. It's just who they are. And so I love that aspect of it. It's just like you see a family who believes in God and just how they get through things together.
It was on the Great American Pure Flix channel.
Right.
It's available for streaming. It's out there. When I was looking it up, it said it was on Roku. So if you've got the Roku channel, then you should definitely check it out.
Yeah.
Because like you said, there is something about simplicity is not really the right word, but there's a relatability. Right. It's really easy to get caught up in the blockbusters with the Marvel movies or, Dune or Gladiator, like all these big, big stories. But there's something sort of comfortable. And I think this is one reason so many kids' films do so well at the box office or even streaming. Like, because there's something you can, like you said, you can watch with your family.
Yeah.
And if you've got, like, my friend has daughters from like 11 up to 18, it's hard to find something that'll fit for everyone.
Right.
Because the stuff you can watch with the 18-year-old, you can't really watch with the 11-year-old.
Yeah.
And you want something that's good to watch that actually connects with you. One of the things I think it was Michael Dix that says, the stories that resonate because they're stories of transformation and revelation.
Right. Right.
And it sounds like there's a lot of that happening for probably all the characters there in Shadrach, without giving too many spoilers away.
Yes, exactly. And on that, for the whole family thing, that just reminded me of something that happened when the show first started streaming on Great American Pure Flix. I got an email from a high school classmate. I'd actually seen her before at a reunion a couple of years before. And she sent me an email and she goes, I just wanted to let you know that our grandkids came over and we watched all 6 episodes of Shadrach and we loved it. And awesome. I copied that email and I sent it to the director, to the executive producer, to the publicity at Great American Pure Flix, and just said, guys, you're never going to get a better review than that. Somebody who's just saying, I can sit down with my grandkids and we just all loved it.
That's awesome. So do you have any upcoming projects in the hopper?
It's fun. I just auditioned yesterday for one of those Christmas rom-com movies that they seem to do by the hundreds. So there's a couple of things like that, and just some things that I'm still waiting to hear on, but nothing to announce just yet. But you mentioned about Great American Pure Flix. I want to let people know that you can either go to just pureflix.com and put in Shadrach in the search bar and it'll come up. I mean, it should be featured on one of their banners somewhere. But the other thing you can do is if you've got Amazon Prime Video, you can go to Amazon Prime and in the search bar, just put Shadrach series. And Shadrach, for people who don't know, is Shadrach. But you can put in Shadrach series and what'll come up is a title page with Shadrach, and there will be a link there where you can go to Great American Pure Flix, and you can get a sign up. If you're not already a subscriber, you can sign up for a free 7-day trial subscription and check us out.
Yeah, you absolutely should do that.
It's a joy to be a part of projects like that because I really think there's a need these days, and you're seeing it a lot more. There's such a need for quality entertainment that does speak to the values of so many people across the nation. People are just hungry for this kind of stuff. And the good thing is, Shadrach is a fairly small production with a smaller budget, but it's beautifully done. The photography, the Music is wonderful. And Livy Birch, who plays the 12-year-old Anna, she is wonderful. She's really the heart and soul of the show, and she's going to have a major career. But I don't want to fail to mention another aspect about the show and the actors. The 10-year-old boy was played, he's actually older than that, played by a phenomenal actor and young boy named Cale Farron. Now, Cale suffers from a rare blood disorder called Fanconi anemia, which attacks the bone marrow. It makes you susceptible to leukemia and other forms of cancer. And one of the hallmarks of that is that his hands turn inward at the wrist, and he has no thumbs. So it's like he's got claws on the end of his arms. And he is just Cale, the actor, just this delightful kid who's just full of joy, always cracking jokes on the set. And that's kind of his personality in the show, too. He's really the humor in a lot of ways. But going back to what I was saying about the faith aspect not being something you're hit over the head with, it's just who they are. Well, the same thing about Cale and his disability. It's just who this family is. They've lived with him all of his life, of course, and it's just part of who he is. And he goes around and he rides the horse. They involve him in everything. He's got this little claw of the hand, and he's going around giving people high fives. And I just love the way they do that. It's a really wonderful part of the show, which I don't think you see on a lot of shows these days, especially with a kid like that who's such a major character, and just saying, hey, he's a normal kid. And he, as much as anybody, goes, maybe we should pray about that. I mean, I love the way they handled that whole thing.
That's awesome. So Greg, thank you very much for your time. This was everything I was hoping it would be. Exciting, getting to deep dive into some of your story and some of who you are. We say that you don't really know a man until you know his story. So I appreciate you sharing your story with us.
Well, thank you, Paul. I really appreciate it. I really enjoyed talking with you.
All right. So this has been Paul McDonald and Greg Allan Martin talking, yes, about Shadrach, but a lot about what it's like walking with God and living out that Micah 6:8 to love justice, to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with God. And from everything that we've talked about today, that's the man I see in front of me. So I appreciate that time and who you are. And it's just much appreciation to you, man. And so check out Shadrach. Yeah, check out Shadrach. However you can get it, there'll be links in the show notes. I'll have links to your social media stuff. And all that'll be in the show notes and on the website, menatthemovies.com/podcast. And so, just been a great dive into the industry and into your story. So thanks again. And for all you listeners, hope you enjoyed it and hope you join us next time here on the Men at the Movies podcast.
Something inside has been awakened. I can no longer be who I was before. But if I am no longer who I was, who am I to be?